Sanjay. Let me say hi for you.
How are you?
Thank you.
Your Excellency, Mr. Salman Khurshid, Minister of External Affairs, Republic of India. Ambassador Gopinath Pillai, Chairman, Institute of South Asian Studies. Ms. Vijay Thakur Singh, High Commissioner of India to Singapore. Professor Tan Tayon, Director, Institute of South Asian Studies. Mrs. Elaine Ang, CEO of National Library Board. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon to you all. On behalf of the Institute of South Asian Studies at the National University of Singapore, I warmly welcome you to this afternoon's public lecture with Minister Salman Khurshid. I now invite Ambassador Gopinath Pillai, Chairman of the Institute of South Asian Studies, to deliver the opening remarks. Ambassador Pillai, please.
His Excellency, Mr. Salman Khurshid, Honorable Minister of External Affairs, Government of India. Her Excellency, Mrs. Vijay Thakur Singh, Indian High Commissioner to Singapore. Elaine, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me a great deal of pleasure to welcome the Minister to Singapore and to ISAS, Institute of South Asian Studies. ISAS has been fortunate to have the privilege of hosting lectures and special addresses of several senior ministers from India and the other South Asian countries. We are very happy to have the latest edition, Mr. Khurshid. I am also happy to welcome the new Indian High Commissioner, Mrs. Vijay Thakur Singh. May I wish you, Madam, a very successful stay in Singapore. I also want to recognize the distinguished visitor I have from Nepal, Mr. Vinod Chowdhury. Mr. Khurshid is visiting Singapore at a time when the Asia Pacific is gaining increasing prominence in India's foreign and strategic policies. In Singapore, we are happy to note that not only are India-Singapore relations strong and robust, Singapore is also able to play a role in facilitating India's closer integration with Asia Pacific through its advantages of being in an economic, business and cultural hub. The topic for today is India, Southeast Asia, today and tomorrow. In another 2 years' time, India and Singapore will be celebrating 50 years of their diplomatic relationship. That would indeed be a significant milestone. Both countries, while following different development approaches and policies, have come a long way, fulfilling their national objectives and goals. They are now important stakeholders in each other's economic progress. They have gained a lot of interacting with by interacting with each other and are expected to do more in the future. India has also been embarking on its Look East policy. It has embarked on its Look East policy since 1990s. In this respect, the Minister's visit to Southeast Asia and Singapore is significant given that LEP had just finished 2 decades. India's formal links with ASEAN has increased by leaps and bounds over the last 2 decades. As India rises in strategic eminence, the region expects India to play a proactive strategic role in the area that is commensurate with its economic size and strategic growth. We would look forward to hearing the Honourable Minister's views on this. It is also my pleasure for me to introduce to those who don't know ISAS and also to Minister. As an autonomous research institute within the National University of Singapore, established in 2005, ISAS specializes in studying economic, strategic and political subjects on South Asia. It also plays a major role in increasing the knowledge and awareness about South Asia and in Singapore and in the region. ISAS efforts to build bridges between South Asia and the rest of the world has led it to take up study of South Asian diaspora and organize South Asian diaspora conventions in Singapore. The next such convention will be in November this year. The success of any institution depends on the scholars that it has. And I'd like to commend my team of scholars, led very ably by Professor Chanta Yong, and a management team which is led by Johnson, so that they organize events efficiently and pleasantly. The final thanks I have is for the National Library Board for giving us this space. And I hope you will have a very pleasant exchange of views with the Minister, and we look forward to the Minister's speech. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Pillai. It gives me great pleasure to invite His Excellency, Mr. Salman Khurshid, Minister of External Affairs, Republic of India, to deliver his public lecture. Minister, please.
Good afternoon to all of you, Ambassador Gopinath Pillai, Chairperson of the National Library Board, High Commissioner, very familiar faces, friends from the past, and very distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I am absolutely honored and overwhelmed to find such large attendance gathering on such a beautiful afternoon when the sun, I'm sure, invites you very eagerly. But that you are here and you're present in such large numbers indicates to me not so much your interest in what I have to say, but the topic and the content of the subject, the relationship of India with Southeast Asia, both of today and tomorrow. Surprising, you didn't say yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Because frankly, what we have today and what we are to build for tomorrow is largely, in a sense, to do with what we've had in the past. And that's where I distinguish our relationship with ASEAN from other very important and significant relationships that you have, including with China. I think that the importance of the converse that we find in Southeast Asia between countries like India and China, and now, if I might add, Europe and the United States of America. This is, of course, the recognition of the fact that that the focus of world economics and geopolitics has inevitably shifted to this region. And it's good for all of us that it has, because it's come as part of a process of evolution that we anticipated by introducing in the early 90s the idea of low-case policy of the Indian nation. We have had, over a historical period, we've had engagement in a very, very significant way with Africa, which grew out of the Afro-Asian vision that the first generation of top leaders in India had, led by Jawaharlal Nehru. And then we had this relationship that drew us towards the USSR, the admiration that India had for the equity that was critical to the economic and market arrangements in the erstwhile USSR, which fascinated the first generation of Indian leaders who believed that independence from political masters had to be complemented and supplemented by independence from want, and therefore equality played a very, very significant and important role in our perceptions of the world. And equality in terms of ownership of public utilities understanding of the distance that we had to go and the direction in which we had to go. It is over a period where we believe, having successfully created a model of considerable equity, that we take in need of resources, multiply incomes, to garner resources and to provide with greater potential exploitation by the ordinary citizen of India. And that's when the great reform process, economic reform process took place in India, hardly complete even after 25 years. We are still struggling on certain dimensions of that process. But the core areas that we are able to address of our economic reform process unlocked an enormous potential. And as that potential got unlocked, we had to refine and redefine our priorities. And that's where we saw South Asia as a very, very significant potential for partnership. We knocked on the doors of ASEAN. We were invited in as sectoral partners, dialogue partners, and then it took 10 years for us to reach the next level. 20 years now of this relationship. We celebrated in commemorative summit that we had in Delhi, and I think those of you who would have been fortunate to be present at that celebration done at Rashtrapati Bhavan, there could not have been a greater statement of how beautifully we can combine ourselves than the performance that was done, the magical performance that was done in Rashtrapati Bhavan, combining the best cultural presentations from this entire region with what India had to offer. How our music combined, how our dance steps combined, how our costumes combined, how our smiles combined, and how a true resounding of the collective perception of the world was presented in colors and in sounds of music. And I see that, frankly, I see that as both the past, the present, and the future of our relationship. But as we look at this, it's important for you to understand where India is. It is difficult to understand what India's relationship with Southeast Asia is unless you actually understand where India is. And if I look at the experience of Singapore, I'm both encouraged and in a sense envious. You were able to do in a short span of 20 years with the limitations of space, the limitations of resources. You were able to do what India is still trying to do because it happens to be doing it on a much larger scale. And the hope that I get from this is that once we complete that process that we did in 20 years, we probably will take 40 years, maybe 50 years. But once we've completed that journey, that you completed in 20 years, India could truly be a magnified version of what Singapore is. If we could think of the vast stretches of India being able to get to the same level of economic consolidation, of economic opportunity, of efficiency, of professionalism and performance, we could do this 100 times over, 1,000 times over. And when that happens, be it in our lifetimes or beyond our lifetimes, I think if there is one country that we will have to necessarily acknowledge and applaud with tremendous sense of gratitude, it will be Singapore. Because you opened the doors for us to ASEAN. And I think that is an acknowledgement that will be writ large in the history of our relations with Southeast Asia. trends. And many of the Singapore, the visions about Singapore and perceptions of Singapore translated them in themselves into popular legend in our country. I don't know how many of you know that folk singers in the eastern part of my state, UP, and in Bihar, I attended some events, folk singers singing about how they wanted to make Azamgarh into Singapore and how they wanted to convert Banaras and Guru into Singapore. Now, Singapore for them is an idea of pinnacle of success of human beings working together in a multi-plural society, converting their diversity into an enormous strength and richness, making it into a heritage of productivity, and that's being translated into a simple folk song in our country. And I think that's why it is important for an audience in Southeast Asia to know where has India reached. There are parts of India, islands perhaps, and parts of India that look like Singapore and Hong Kong. But I will admit that they do not have the same level of efficiency that something that looks like Singapore and Hong Kong inevitably must have. There are parts of Bangalore, for instance, you can walk into the campus of Infosys, or you can walk to the campus of Wipro, you can walk into their training centers and universities that they've set up, and you would think that you are in Hong Kong or Singapore. You can go to Gurgaon, parts of Gurgaon, and you would think that you are here again. You go to parts of Hyderabad, parts of Bangalore, and you think that you are in this part of the world. And I think there are some areas in which we could match the efficiency that you have become accustomed to as a matter of everyday life. Efficiency still is an achievement in India. It is both a necessity and an achievement. But efficiency here is a way of life. But the challenge that we have is a challenge that you had when you set off on this journey. When you set off on this journey, there were people who believed that this was not the path to take. There were people who believed that social justice required not to take the path of growth that you took. And there was political resistance. That political resistance had to be overcome. There is political resistance in India as well. And we are in the process of overcoming that political resistance that you can see in pure numbers and size and volumes and the spread. We would have, in proportionate terms, much greater resistance to handle. And that's the reason is that if you have to get transformation to take place without a revolution, it is tough in one way. A revolution is tough in another way, but a transformation is tough in one way. And a transformation, therefore, by its very nature, in an evolutionary process, takes that much longer. A revolution can happen much faster, but then controlling revolution itself is a very, very tricky matter. And I think you've seen, perhaps you're seeing today, anything that looks more like a revolution than evolution is difficult to handle, because people say a revolution often eats up its own children, and you see what's happening in Egypt. Every time someone has said to us, "You're taking too long," our answer has always been, it's better to take long, but to do transformation and change that is sustainable, and to move fast, quickly, and then slip and fall. Because if you slip and fall, will there be capacity, leadership, opportunity, and determination to be able to overcome the setback? Is an invulnerable has a clear answer to. What we have done in India is that we've allowed for market reform to take place. Fortunately for us, we were never a completely closed market. We were an intermediate market, if I may describe it in that way. We were controlled in certain areas, but we were open in certain areas. And quite often, when people talk of privatization in our country, we say to them that here are examples of human enterprise in India where government has never been in control. There are huge parallel movements in various human sectors, human endeavor sectors, where government and the private sector has worked hand in hand, but the government has often been at a disadvantage. Private sector has often been much faster and has been much more attractive. And if I was to take school education as an example, the private sector has been 10 times more attractive in school education than the state sector has been. But the state sector has been a very important ballast to ensure that people who will not be able to get into private sector education because of the cost would nevertheless not be excluded from the educational system. And what we've done in our own unique way is that we have now brought the two together. There are two ways in which we brought the two together. In some places we said to the private sector, why don't you take up the state schools and run them? So you get the infrastructure free, you get the wherewithals available from government. The government will continue to support some students. You can get other students from the private, from the open market, and you run this institution, give better quality education than we've been able to give. That's one way that we brought confluence. The other way in which we brought confluence is by saying to private sector schools, under new legislation that is the right to education, that every private sector school will have to concede 25% of its seats for people who are deserving but who do not have money to pay for their education, and the schools will be subsidized by the central government, partly by central government and partly by the state government, to an extent of say about 80% or whatever. So we will insist that the schools do some equivalent of CSR, but that much of that would be supported by the state and central government. So state and central government no longer setting up schools in which people will not get satisfactory results, but actually support what would be done in private schools. Similarly, in skills development and skills training, we are doing the same thing. We are still now, after 5 years of experimentation, we are trying to tweak it a little bit. But what we've done is that having tried to run skills development programs, not with the kind of success that we were looking for, we said to the private sector, why don't you do the skills development? You don't have to have the institution in one place. You can follow the supply-demand principle and go where your recruitment base is available. Train in such subjects, in such areas where you can recruit people. Give them training. If you want to bring them into your factories, train them there. If you want to go to their habitations, train them there. Then at least 70% of the people that you train, you must bring into employment. And if you do that, the government will pay the cost of training. So we brought the public and private sector together in a unique way in which it's never been done in the past. So what we've done, even as we've opened up the marketplace, licensing has been reduced considerably. We do have issues equivalent to past licensing of capacity and price controls. We do have a parallel licensing system today, but that's because of environmental controls and environmental protection. But otherwise, we've opened up the marketplace. But what we have done is that while we open up the marketplace, we do away with price controls and controls of raw material, price control of raw materials. We are bolstering up the purchasing power amongst lower middle class people and people who are at the very low end of the social ladder by giving them free education and good quality education, as I mentioned to you, and then ensuring that they have good nourishment. The food security bill will be passed now very shortly. We give them a swipe card, 30,000 rupees worth of health insurance if they happen to be below the poverty line, and then of course we give them housing in the next 5 years, hoping to complete housing for all below poverty line citizens of our country. So we give them strength to protect them against gaps for them in the marketplace, as indeed for any onerous development that happens if there is high inflation, for instance, because of one reason or another. At least their food, their education, and their housing and health, 4 areas in which they will remain protected. And those are the areas where inflation hurts the most. So this is how we today present ourselves as a country that on the cutting edges is willing and moving forward to engage with the world. And here the focus, of course, being on ASEAN, is to see how we can develop what we at the commemorative celebrations saw as the ASEAN-India Partnership for Peace and Shared Prosperity. And that's and that's really the purpose for which I was in Brunei, and our participation in both the ARF on security issues and our participation in the East Asia Summit, in the ASEAN Foreign Ministers meeting, to take forward our commitment to the integration of South Asia. And I say South Asia because we are the leader pack in South Asia, purely in terms of our economy and size of our population. But get South Asia connected with East Asia, with ASEAN, and then look beyond ASEAN into APEC. And this is, for us, the connectivity between Indian Ocean and the Pacific. So the Indo-Pacific ocean connectivity is essentially replicated on the ground connectivity that we have started from India into Myanmar, and from Myanmar into Thailand, what we call the trilateral highway. And once we get to Thailand, beyond Thailand, the alignment to Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam will complete the dream of this fantastic concept, the idea of the Great Asian Highway. And once we have this Great Asian Highway, and we have the conceptual connectivity that we get on the Indo-Pacific ocean concept, then I think we can truly become contributors to the community of ASEAN, for which your target is 2015. We will be willing and ready at that moment to participate with you. So what we are now doing with the European Union, still negotiating a broad-based agreement on trade and investment with the European Union, we've already completed with ASEAN. So we are really, in many ways, steps ahead of our collaboration with other major economic organizations. We are way ahead in terms of our cultural links, we are way ahead in terms of our emotional commitment, and I think we are way ahead in terms of our presence in the community of Southeast Asia. And I hope that the warmth and the indulgence that we get at each gathering and in each meeting, and I've just come from 3 very important meetings here in this short time that I've been today here in Singapore, and I must say that every meeting tells us the same tale again and again, that we are truly partners, or shall we say, we are truly brothers and sisters of one large family. Some of the connectivity issues are really our responsibility. We have, as I said, we must provide the same levels of efficiency response that is now become, that ASEAN has become accustomed to. But at the same time, we hope that the willingness, emotional willingness, and the intellectual willingness to give India a greater opportunity to engage here would be something that will constantly be translated into reality. I needn't tell you that the bilateral trade between India and ASEAN region for 2012, the target was $70 billion US. We surpassed that target despite the fact that the world is in difficult times. In the last few years, our trade has been growing with ASEAN at 22%. In the last few years, it grew as much as 32% in 2012. And I believe by the time that the ASEAN community is created in 2015, we would have crossed $100 billion. Now that's not anything to scoff at, anything to put away as being unimportant. What we do need, of course, is in our country a greater attitudinal expansion that must take place. We have, in the past few years, been somewhat inward-looking. And I must say that today, in our conversation that I had with your leadership here, it was significantly flagged that ASEAN cannot afford to be inward-looking because ASEAN is too small in terms of the number of consumers. ASEAN needs markets, and therefore a lot of the ASEAN economies are export-driven. India has not been an export-driven economy because India has a huge domestic consumption base. But we need exports. We need exports both to get impetus to growth, but also because we need to earn dollars in order to import the huge amount of fuel that we import. 80% of our fuel is imported. Therefore, we need hard currency to import. There was a time when we did trade in rupees to import oil from Russia, from the Soviet Union, but that's not available to us today. So even though we were not really an export-driven economy in the moments of our growth, and we still remain today a very significant domestic consumption economy, it's important for us to engage with the world because we need hard currency in order to be able to import enough fuel to keep ourselves going. One important one important fact that I want to share with you is the strength of the Indian economy is when our inflation rates were very high, 22% 2 years ago, because of the special was slowing down, in fact diving, and because of the money supply being liberalized, inflation rates were going up. And when we tried to contain the inflation rates, our manufacturing base began to be affected, and we had a very difficult balancing act to do in the last 3 years. Our economy was growing at 8%. We were actually beginning to think of 9, 10, and today we're down to 5%. And this has all happened within a year and a half. But at 5%, it is important to know that when we thought India's economy was slowing down, the two-wheeler sales in our rural areas was skyrocketing. And that's where the internal strength of the Indian economy comes. That our rural areas are now finally able to stand up in the marketplace, and their purchasing power continues to grow, their saving rates continue to remain stable. And with the enormous amount of expenditure now going into infrastructure development taking place, with huge fast roads that you take for granted, but for us is something new on the landscape. And those fast roads now cutting across rural areas, offering, as it were, a real new opportunity that people can tangibly feel. India is stirring and India is beginning to change. But what we'll have to do is, as we look towards South Asia, we'll have to ensure that South Asia is stable. Southeast Asia is stable. Southeast Asia is without tension, and then Southeast Asia keeps those lanes clear and open, which have been the arteries of your growth, and those are the sea lanes. And therefore, when one issue arises about possibility of disagreement in the ASEAN region, and bilateral disagreements that could appear to seem very dangerous, we join in the advice that everyone gives to each other here, which is that it is very important through dialogue and peaceful means to ensure that these irritants are kept at bay. Southeast Asia must not become victim of disagreements on issues which are eminently solvable and eminently avoidable. We certainly are willing to help in any way possible. There are many dimensions and elements of our cooperation. I mentioned cooperation with ASEAN region. We have cooperation under BIMSTEC, which is the grouping of the Bay of Bengal Initiative for multi-sectoral, technical and economic cooperation. We have our Mekong Ganga cooperation, which again is very, very significant, and that provides linkage between India, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar and Vietnam, adding one more dimension of strength to our relationship with this region. And so, as we look at the experience of our past, and we look at the experience of your past, we believe that there is much for us to learn and much for us to share. Much that we believe we have to offer, and much we believe that we have to take from you. I think it's important that we protect your region from tension. It's important that we protect your region from the shadow of terrorism that strikes in some parts of Southeast Asia from time to time. If I might say, we have some experience on handling terrorism, and we have some experience in being able to show patience with people who believe violence is the answer to our future, while we all are confident that the real future lies in working together, in collaborating, in treating each other as members of a family, where the prosperity of one will be a shared prosperity of the entire family. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you so much, Minister. Thank you, Ambassador Pillai. Ambassador Pillai will now has joined Minister Khurshid for the question and answer session, and he will kindly chair this session as well. So I now hand the floor to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, for a brilliant speech. Indian leaders generally are very eloquent in articulating their views. Even by the high standard of India, I think the Minister today, I think, displayed eloquence of his ability to articulate very clearly the views of his country and what he thinks can happen in the future. I am very touched by the kind words he said about Singapore. He said that Singapore was an example of the pinnacle of success, to use his words. And he also thanked Singapore for opening the door. I think the doors would have been open to India anyway, but maybe Singapore allowed a little bit of wind from this part of the world to make it a little more agile. The third point I wanted to make to the Minister, he mentioned about the connectivity, land connectivity. I'm very happy to say that the ISAS has already started to work on, we are doing some studies on the northeast of India and its connectivity to ASEAN through Myanmar. We have a study group. I think we are publishing some publications. We are going to have a conference on that in Taiwan, right? So these are the 3 points I have. I just wanted to make that before I open it. I'm sure you have many, many questions. and the Minister has been kind enough to answer. He has had a very heavy day, so don't be too unkind to him. He said he will want water before answering questions, which we have provided. So do ask your questions as politely and as sharply as possible. Yeah. Yes, please, yeah.
For your wonderful speech, and thank you. Welcome to Singapore. I have a question for you from the media side. I publish a magazine called India Say. It's the first and possibly the only magazine for overseas Indians in Singapore, Malaysia, and we hope to make it regional as well. We've noticed in all the time that we've been here, I mean that's quite considerable, over 20 years, that China, the other great giant, economic giant and political giant in Asia and I'd say the world, is making quite great strides in its state media, penetrating many countries and being quite a voice both on print and television, etc. Being accepted not just by their diaspora, but even by mainstream media in various countries. We don't see Indian state media doing likewise. In fact, whatever soft power of India is carried across the world is usually done by the private sector, for instance, the entertainment channels, ZTV and Sony, etc. And I'm able to say, a magazine like India Say, which is ours. So what does the Foreign Ministry, or what does the government of India plan to do to connect more with the diaspora? And we don't mean just politically.
I think you've touched on a very, very important point. I have an explanation. When you move from a controlled system to an open system, sometimes you assume that the open system has its own correctives, and that the general preferences and the market allows things and ideas to find their own place. This has not been our general experience. We found that, as I just mentioned, in education, we found that in the marketplace. When you're an imperfect market, you need to continue intervention and you need to continue supporting those who would be initially disadvantaged in the market, whether it's the market of ideas, education, of jobs, of skills, and opportunities. And that's what we have done in our country. In our constitutional arrangement, we provide for reservations. We now, in all elected offices below Parliament, we provide for 50% reservation for women. In many cases, there are 60% women getting elected now over the generations. But we still think it's important to provide that affirmative assistance to women, as we believe we need to provide it to certain categories of social groups that will be disadvantaged, despite the mandate of equality that the Constitution provides. Similarly, I think in the area of media, we had a very strong state media presence across the globe to the extent that we had a footprint in the past. But that's contracted because we vacated space for private media. And we have a very vigorous and vast private media in our country, much to a great deal of discomfort of some of us in public life. But we believe it's a commitment to democracy, and our discomfort is a very small thing compared to the advantage that democracy has by free media. And free media means unregulated media. Nowhere in the world is there unregulated media. unregulated beach. But be that as it may, it's again a unique Indian way of life. I agree that our presence in terms of open market, our media has not attended to our place in the sun, or under the sun in the world. And they also haven't shown enough interest in the world, because there is so much available to them on the domestic menu. And we are still examining in the ministry how we can work beyond what we are doing at present. We introduced a few years ago the public diplomacy division in our ministry, beyond the external publicity division, which has now become an outreach arm of our ministry, using both the soft and the hard areas of diplomacy. But I think that your point that there has to be a media presence is very important. Secretary and I were discussing it, in fact, earlier in the day. We've discussed this back at home as well. We are in touch with some people who want to collaborate with the Ministry of External Affairs to create platforms in which there would be assistance from us in terms of material that they would otherwise have to collect at great cost to themselves, but that we would not be controlling them, because that's not permissible or advisable. But the material would be available for dissemination, and that would give them the platform on which they would then be able to provide an outreach and feedback channels to the world, particularly that part of the world where we are active. And I hope that in not too distant future we'll be able to do this. But meanwhile, the good work that people like you are doing should continue. And now that modern technology allows you to reach much further and much faster, I hope that you will take advantage of modern technology and give us the assistance that we need.
Maybe you can use the mic for that.
So, Mr. Minister, I'm Surya from ISAS. So, to take you away from East Asia for a while remaining in East Asia, you may recall that the US President Barack Obama and the Chinese President Xi Jinping had a massive summit spread over several hours, more than 8 hours of talking. And they decided to move towards a new type or a new model of relationship between two great powers, namely China and the US. This amounts to something like an informal G2 or group of two consisting of China and the US. A G2 of partnership, if not G2 of power sharing. In these circumstances, what in your opinion is or should be India's strategic vision? Should it be neo-non-alignment as between China and the US? Should it be tilt towards the US? Should it be autonomy in the traditional sense of the term? Or should it be something like India remaining a constrained power in the South Asian region itself? Thank you, sir.
Well, let me just take the last part of your question. India has no reason and has certainly not any inclination to remain confined to any part of the world. Of course, there are issues about human resources and financial capacity and physical ability, etc. But I have already visited Latin America, and I expect again within a month or so to visit Latin America once again, and to have a HOM's conference, Heads of Mission conference there in Latin America, which we are doing here now. Tomorrow I will have Heads of Mission from all across the ASEAN countries meet me here. We've done it in Africa and Uganda already, and hopefully we will be able to do this exercise in Central Asia and in parts of Europe as well. So it is our intention not to remain away from any part of the globe. And you would be interested to know that I've just been to Arctic, and I tried to go to the Antarctic, and I couldn't go there because of bad weather, but I got as close as I could to the Antarctic in bad weather. So we are going to go everywhere. What we need to do is to strengthen our numbers. We are looking at a 10-year plan for doubling the numbers that we have in the Foreign Service, and also having a lateral entry for 2-3 years for people with domain knowledge from other sectors. And all this is going apace. As far as China and the US are concerned, we treat both of them on merit as strategic partners. We don't, we've never been known to subscribe to a view that was projected that the United States of America would be interested in encircling China. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But we didn't in any way think that that was a great idea to which India would want to subscribe. Similarly, we've never given China any reason to believe that we treat our relationship with China to be conditional upon and based on our relationship with somebody else or their relationship with somebody else. You know, we have engaged with China despite our difficulties with Pakistan and their compulsion or historical alliance, close alliance with Pakistan. But we haven't allowed that to come in the way of a progressive engagement with China that, as you have seen, has grown rapidly. Our Prime Minister met the previous leadership 8 times in the last few years. And the first visit that the Premier Lee made outside his country was in New Delhi, which I think was a very, very, very important and significant gesture. So we would deal with every country, big or small, on merits. We deal with Maldives and Russia and China, Japan and everyone. And we have dealt with Iran as a friend to the full knowledge of the United States of America. They have not told us that you must stop talking to Iran, which is a good thing. The important thing is that India is able to talk openly and clearly to anyone. I met yesterday the foreign minister of North Korea, and we talked openly, frankly. We have a lot of important events going on, part of a celebration of 40 years of our diplomatic relations, but at the same time, we have said so at the UN, and we said so to him as well. We said that if you're looking for security, it will come through engagement and relationships with the globe, not by isolating yourself on some pretext, going nuclear and isolating yourselves from the rest of the world, making it more difficult for even those who are your friends to argue a case for you. And we were quite, at the same time, if they have humanitarian concerns, we would want to address them. So I think that we don't like putting ourselves in a box anywhere. And frankly, the language that we use during the heyday of the NAM movement is today translated into a modern day phrase that we use, which is strategic autonomy. We remain strategically autonomous. Remaining strategically autonomous is, we believe, the right moral thing to do. It may have specific advantages and disadvantages given the situation in the world, but we do believe that our foreign policy has a huge element of moral principles built into it, and it's consistent with those moral principles that we don't place ourselves in any group or any alliance that would be inimical to anybody else.
Okay, maybe can I start from the back? Yes.
Your Excellency, my name is Tang Li. I run a small blog in Singapore, so I speak from a pseudo-intellectual perspective. Several points I pick up. One, you mentioned that India has an interest in seeing ASEAN stable and secure. So when you say security, does that mean that India, in its efforts to help this region stay secure, will be sending some military forces once in a while just to help control the area? The second thought I had was, we talk about the two big giants of Asia, India and China. You've just mentioned Prime Minister Lee's first visit was to India. Now, in the sense of ASEAN, you have India, which is, I think, running all the services, China's running manufacturing, everything. There's a bit of fear in this part of the world that, you know, everything's going to be swallowed up by these two giants. So, do you see that? What would you say to that? Do you see India as being an investor overseas and encouraging ASEAN nations to welcome Indian investment and say that we're not just going to swallow everything up? And the third point I have is that, and this was a point that Dr. Rajan made in April, is that India is a democracy with democratic institutions. How much of India being a democracy do you see the democracy of India meaning as influencing foreign policy? In the sense that when you talk to the dictatorship, you know, when you talk to the president of a dictatorship, you're talking to that entire country, whereas if you talk to somebody in a democracy, the leader actually has, in the case of India, several hundred million people to answer to.
Well, thank you. Thanks very much. I think that's a whole week's answer that I need to give to those questions. But as far as security, strategic relationships are concerned, we do exercises with countries in the region. We do with Singapore, for instance, exercises and training for Army and the Air Force. And I think that's the reason being that I asked my High Commissioner why not the Navy, and she said there's a lot of water around here, no air and land. So India has to give its land and air to collaborate with the armed forces of Singapore. So we do a lot of training, we do exchange of visits of ships, we do a lot of exchanging of information and capacity building. But India doesn't, as a matter of policy, India doesn't engage and believes that it's not very sensible to engage in a way of involving our troops and our fighting forces in any country. We believe in self-reliance, and we believe that every country should have its own ability to protect and defend itself. But of course, there is a larger perspective, which is what ARF is about, and their contribution that one can jointly and collectively make. We are always willing to do so, and we will continue to do so. As far as your concerns about China's ability and economic clout and might is concerned, I think ultimately you have to decide. There will always be different models available. You know, you don't worry about one particular car being eaten up by another car because there are 2 cars in the market. There are 30 cars or 40 cars in the market, and you pick the best that you like. Somebody likes an SUV, somebody likes a small car, somebody likes a flashy car, somebody likes a sports car, somebody likes a car with 6 gears, and somebody likes a car with 4 gears, depending on fuel efficiency. I think it's important the world grows in prosperity and in opportunity, that there should be for every country a menu to choose from. We may offer one model, China may offer another model. And I think ultimately the market itself will ensure that the best product of a country gets celebrated and gets applauded, and the shakeout of the market will then give priority in some products to one country and other products to another country. And I think that this is not something on which there should be any major concern. In fact, the good thing is that you have both the Chinese menu and the Indian menu, as indeed you may have other menus as well. I'm told the American menu is not an attractive one these days because the Americans are not producing a lot. So, but they may get back in their economy, they will get back to manufacture and production once again, so you may have another menu. And I don't think that should be a concern. The more the merrier. And finally, the market will ensure, the global market will ensure efficiencies to give you the best product at the best price. So I don't think that should be a concern and a worry. And it's certainly not a concern and a worry for us at all. We believe that we can deal with the pressures of the Chinese products by improving our own efficiency and ensuring that innovation gives us an alternative product that, at least for our own consumption, will be more effective. But protectionism is something that we agree neither China nor India or America or for that matter ASEAN should, protectionist walls should not be created once again. But in terms of competition, there is no harm, legitimate competition between all the economies.
Yes.
Good afternoon, Excellency. My name is Daskar. I'm an Indian, but have lived and worked here in Singapore for the last 12 years very happily. And I think other Indians should thank Singapore for the warm welcome which always extended to us. But my question really, sir, is about connectivity. You had talked about land connectivity, which of course is very important between India and the ASEAN countries. But I think with the large seaboard which India has, and also being the large country it is, sea and air connectivity are also equally, if not more important than land connectivity alone. There are a lot of ASEAN countries, I think, which need even greater sea connectivity with India, particularly Myanmar, for instance, and Thailand. And I know they are developing boats on the western seaboard of ASEAN so that they can have greater connectivity with India. On the question of air connectivity, sir, I would like to think it would be good if India could be generous in affording ASEAN airlines more connectivity with India, particularly when it comes to bilateral air services agreements. I have heard, I don't know whether it is true or not, that in some cases, Singapore Airlines and Silk Air have been denied routes simply because Indian airlines do not have enough planes to operate those routes. For instance, a route from Pune to Singapore, for instance. I don't know whether this is true or not, but maybe it's worth checking into. Similarly, I think other ASEAN airlines which are developing would like to establish flights to India. And maybe the passenger traffic is not enough for Indian airlines to fly to these countries. But surely we can be generous and allow airlines from ASEAN to operate more.
Well, I take your point. I think that we discussed today in a very preliminary sort of way air connectivity. And we have a priority. I'm given to understand that there are ASEAN slots available that can be utilized, particularly in the area of Northeast, where we think that we have an enormous amount to gain by providing Northeast connectivity with ASEAN. I think if that were to happen, we would probably have the kind of situation we have in Andhra Pradesh and Kerala vis-a-vis the West Asian countries. Because of their connectivity is so good that sometimes it's easier to go from Kerala to Dubai and to Delhi than to fly directly to Delhi. So if we can get something like that in the Northeast, I intend to go back and talk to the Civil Aviation Minister. If there are issues of this nature, I think we should solve them. I think today, as we discussed, budget airlines can open up a whole new opportunity between India and ASEAN. And as far as the seaboard connectivity is concerned, we are putting that as a high priority. And we mentioned this also at the ASEAN meeting yesterday. And we will certainly look at how that can be done. I think that's a tremendous potential. And there are no real vested interests that would stand in the way. I know that airline competition with airlines world over is very, very tough, and negotiating seats and routes as far as airlines are concerned, I believe is not a very, very easy job. I have some experience in the past between Air India and German airlines trying to fly to India. So I think that's it's a little complicated, but we need, if it's important that it has to be done, we will certainly put in the political will that is called for in order to ensure that we achieve it. We've certainly taken some notes yesterday and today, and when I get back, I intend to talk to my colleagues and see how we can put that on a fast track.
Okay, this has to be short questions. I have a guy who's staring at me from the back. He's head of IFN. He threatened to switch off the mic system, the PXC 510. But I'll allow these two questions. Singapore will first.
Thank you.
Well, let me see the time. Because we need a little bit of time for tea and the minister to mingle with you. He has a very tight schedule, so that's why I'm being just in about.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. Your Excellency, there's a very quick question about India and ASEAN. When you started to develop peace policy in the 1990s, ASEAN was, in a sense, speaking with one voice. It's quite easy to frame Indian foreign policy towards ASEAN. The stated policy is ASEAN centrality. But we all know now, ASEAN doesn't really speak with one voice anymore. How does that affect Indian diplomacy going forward?
Well, for somebody coming from India, used to so many languages and so many political parties, this is an easy game. That's
I'll come to you in a minute. Yeah. Short question, no comment. Yeah.
Thank you very much for this opportunity, Your Excellency. I'm a researcher at the Economic School. You mentioned the importance of fuel import. So my question is in regards to the potential of, say, gas import from Myanmar or from Iran. It hasn't been too successful in the past, but what do you see going into the future? Is there opportunity for that? And just a short second question, would India have any role to play, for instance, in humanitarian aspects like the Rohingya conflict? Thank you.
Well, quick answers there. I think that India is very hungry for fuel, as you know, and we're looking at diversifying and ensuring that our supply sources remain diversified. We are talking to the United States of America for greater liberal regime for export of gas from the United States. We've just, in our bilateral in Brunei with Canada, received a very warm reception to a possibility of exploring for export from the eastern coast of Canada, exporting gas. We have subscribed to the UN sanctions, not the US sanctions. They call them insurance and transport issues. Our purchases in Iran have gone down, but we are continuing to work on the Tapi pipeline. We expect hopefully that things will get sorted out in Iran and Afghanistan, and that we would then have a secure supply of gas from Central Asia. And then of course there are other alternatives that are still being considered. Much of our gas now is going to be coming in liquefied form and then regasified. In fact, the interesting thing is that up to now we thought that the pipelines were not going to be viable because of the difficulty of going through Pakistan. But in more recent times, Pakistan is seeking gas from India. So this may be an early indication of things to come, and hopefully one day interdependence and good sense, good economic sense will prevail, and the vast gas sources that are available in our not too distant neighborhood would become accessible to India.
Very last question, yes.
Minister, I believe I have a privilege of the last question.
Can you introduce yourself?
My name is Vivek Katpalia. I am an Indian lawyer with a law firm in Singapore, Indian law firm. We've been here for 6 years. We've spent some time talking about Southeast Asia and China, and for obvious reasons. Another country with which we've been obviously expanding our relationship in the recent past has been Japan. And Singapore is playing a very important role for Japanese investors who have, their regional headquarters here, a lot of people here interacting with Indian counterparts. We're seeing a lot of flow from Japan. So I wanted your views on our relationship with Japan and where you see it going forward, because it seems to be in a very friendly state of affairs with Japan, and your views on that would be good.
We have a very significant and special strategic partnership with Japan. And again, it's an example of how India is able to balance its friendships. We have a growing relationship with China, and we have an extremely fruitful relationship with Japan. and we don't allow one to affect the other. Japan is very welcome. I think there's some very important investments Japan is making in India. In the Delhi-Mumbai corridor, Japan has taken a very special interest. And we would like to see a lot more happening in Japan and ourselves. They have made some important far-reaching proposals like fast trains and so on, fast-speed trains, etc. We are still looking and considering some of those matters, but Japan is very, very important for us. And I think that as we increase our engagement in the Pacific, Japan again will obviously play a very important role. Thank you.
Earlier this year, when I met Minister Khurshid in Cochin for the Pravasi conference, I told him that there are a lot of little bit of bad news coming out of India. But the best news that came out from India at that time was the appointment of Mr. Salman Khurshid as a foreign minister, because he articulates the Indian foreign policy better than most people. And I think today his performance has substantiated my thought on this. Ladies and gentlemen, now I turn it to the MC. Thank you.
I now request Ambassador Pillai. Ambassador Pillai will now present 2 ISAS books to the Minister as a token of the Institute's appreciation. The first book is titled Islam and Society, Sociological Explorations by ISAS Visiting Senior Research Fellow, Professor Riaz Hassan.
Riaz Hassan, can you stand up? Please,
And the second book is titled India in South Asia, Domestic Identity Politics and Foreign Policy from Nehru to the BJP by ISAS Research Fellow Sundar Pal Singh.
Thank you very much, Minister. We'll now go and have some tidbits and make